Did you know that? I mean, like, I keep getting the got it.
I'm sure you don't.
Yes. No, I have some papers. Is Sabian online?
Yep.
I mean, like, I keep getting.
Okay,
Oh,
you're live, but I don't see Sadie.
Okay, so we have quorum because we have exactly quorum.
Yep.
Well then, let's get this show on the road. I'm gonna call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. We are having our first meeting of the new year. Happy New Year, everybody. A motion to approve the minutes dated December 4th, and I'm sorry, y'all, my computer is lagging a little tonight.
Yeah.
I move to approve the minutes from the instruction work group meeting dated December 4th, 2023.
Second, Maya.
Thank you, Board Vice President Pearson. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Motion carries 4-0. All right, we're gonna start tonight with our update, which is about early literacy. I want to remind board members that we've had a few discussions about literacy so far this year. So this is meant to be a more contained update on the progress we have made within that work. Yeah, we have a larger conversation tonight about special education and our next 3-year plan. And I turn it over to you, Cindy.
Thank you so much. Jesse, would you mind pulling up the slides, please? While Jesse's pulling up the slides, I just want to take a minute to introduce my colleagues that will be part of our presentation tonight. So we have Dr. Gabi Bell, who is our Director of Literacy and Biliteracy. We have Becky Kunder, who is our Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction. Dr. Caroline Racine-Gillis, who is our Executive Director of Assessments and Learning Supports. And we have Dr. Nancy Molfenter here that will be part of this conversation regarding literacy, as well as our second topic regarding our special education plan. So thank you, and we are looking forward to having this discussion tonight. Next slide, please, Jesse. Thank you. Can you go to the next slide? So as always, we want to start with grounding ourselves in our 3 strategic framework goals. Tonight, I think that all 3 of these goals will definitely be discussed and show how we're trying to realize these goals. In our first conversation, we'll be focusing on goal 1 and 3. And in our second conversation, we'll definitely be lifting all of these goals. Next slide, please, Jesse. And our core values as a district that we are always trying to uplift. Next slide. Thank you. So as I mentioned, tonight is going to be an update on MMSD's early literacy plan and how it aligns to Act 20. You may or may not recall that on July 19th, 2023, the Wisconsin State Legislature enacted Act 20, which is really a reading act. In MMSD, we were very excited to hear about this because I think it affirms a lot of the work that we have already done as a system as it relates to early literacy and beyond. And at that same time, it took us a moment to pause to think about what implications this means for us as a school district in terms of implementing all of the expectations of this legislation, both in terms of policy, practice, and procedure. So tonight is going to be foreshadowing for you where we are with our work around early literacy and the connection that it has to DPI's Act 20. Next slide, please. And as always, we want to ground in where we are as a system around our district improvement and our school improvement. And as you can see here, it's very clear that what we're going to be talking about tonight in terms of the state legislation aligns with the work we're already doing as a system as it relates to literacy and biliteracy. Next slide, please. I think the other thing that we've been trying to make sure that we show this year is this concept of ensuring that we're staying the course, we're consistent, and we're creating stability for our system. When we talk about the work of early literacy tonight, and when we also talk about the special education plan, Both of those are how we are continuing to try and think about our improvement efforts as a system, how we are continuing to think about what it means to improve outcomes for all of our students. We also are really focused on the work of the improvement science and also thinking about how we are building our capacity around data literacy so that we get better at getting better. Next slide, please. And I think this slide just outlines that we are trying to, instead of add to the work we're already doing or shift course based on decisions that are made at the state level, we want to build and align on our current practices and continue to improve on ways of doing better so that we, again, are improving outcomes for our students. We want to create this work of consistency and routines in order to improve in our system through that continuous improvement process. So I think that you'll see that today as we talk about this work. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Becky, our Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction, to walk us through the content.
Thanks, Cindy. So we just wanted to first lift up a timeline for all of you because it's been a pretty rapid work that we have all been engaging in. First of all, if you have, a spare hour or two, you could definitely read Act 20 at some point. Initially, when I think this passed, people were a little bit nervous, thinking about like, what are we going to have to do? What's going to change? And upon a first quick read, we were all like, whoo, we have done a ton of work. We actually, Act 20 passed, like Cindy had said, on July 19th. We quickly had a DPI webinar that many of us in this room attended that evening, and then quickly went to Lisa's office to do some poster writing to talk about things that we already have in place in Madison, and felt really good actually at that moment. I think we were all a little heightened before that, and then mapping that out was important. From that first meeting on September 19th, we actually formulated a group of people from the district across departments. We meet 2 times a month where we talk about kind of where are we in implementing our plan. And in our learning together, we really quickly adjusted and changed the language to just like not Act 20, but really our early literacy plan aligned with Act 20, because we actually have a lot of things currently in place. There are some, of course, things that we need to tighten up and some moves, but overall, we're in a really good space in Madison, which is great. We also have been collaborating with institutes of higher education, as well as DPI, as well as CISA, and then other districts surrounding us right now. We've been engaged in some Zoom meetings with them and just sharing resources. So I think this is kind of a community work in progress currently. Next slide, please. And so we wanted to just be clear with all of you and sharing kind of a high overview, and we put it into a table to think about what are the requirements that are outlined within Act 20. And they really kind of fall into 3 buckets of work or stakeholder things to think about. So as you can see, there is some things that DPI is currently working on and is in progress of. They have an early literacy council that they have formulated. They are currently in the process of recommending science-based literacy curriculum. Ding, ding, ding. We actually have already adopted, right? Science-based literacy curriculum. So we have to feel really good about that. And they are using that literacy council to determine, based on data, where they will deploy potential literacy coaches, as well as knowing that we are kind of waiting for 2 big things from DPI. One of them is their determination of what they're going to say is the reading screener that we will be using for K through third grade. And so we're waiting on that. We're being told that will come out this summer. And then the other thing that we're waiting on that will really impact all of you is the promotion policy guidance. So they're going to be also formulating some guidelines for school boards to be thinking about your promotion policy. That will also be coming out. That will be actually next year. Yes, so in 1 more year from January, actually, to be rolled out the following not this summer, next summer.
25.
Yep. And so then within that work that they call out, though, specifically, we have MMSD guidance that we have to be thinking about at the district level. And so that actually really strongly overlaps with what schools have to do, as you see on this table. We know that we have a responsibility around our adoption and implementation of science-based literacy curriculum, which we are engaged in currently in our schools, K-8, including learning walks for implementation as well. We know that we currently are in the process of using a reading screener. So we just don't know if they will adjust that reading screener or if they will adopt the screener we're currently using, which would be, we're all kind of praying for. We also know that within this work, we will be adopting a literacy plan for students specifically when that we can target their skills. That currently happens right now in school, but it might not be completely written out in the way that families would be able to access that way. So it's really about teachers being able to write out what their plans are. We know that teachers are screening, they're doing whole group assessments, they're also engaged in their small groups, and they're taking notes about all of their students. They all have these file folders, they all have their notes online. And so it's about making sure that it comes together in a more formal process. So there is, Caroline is going to talk a little bit about what does that actually mean in that caregiver notifications in a little bit, as well as what the assessments and what we're looking for the cut scores. We also will continue to, we are not changing our process around specific learning disability requirements. That still happens federally through IDEA. We do have an update about that as well that Ms. Gabi will be sharing in a little bit. And then we continue at the district level to be thinking about how are we engaged in our professional development across administrators, across coaches, and for teachers. And then I think the other one is really thinking about our current summer school planning and what does that look like and how do we provide a more intensive summer semester, which is what Act 20 does require for us. So additional documentation moving forward, as well as then what will the implications be around the guidance for their fourth grade policy, then what will come from all of you with that determination so that we can at the district level think about what does that look like as we implement that into our schools. So as you can see in that final column at the school level, it's really about that science-based reading. It's about the curriculum that they currently already are using and uplifting and working to implement with integrity. It's about that reading screener. Again, we're hoping that if they adopt FastBridge, then we would be in a really strong place to do that. Otherwise, we would have to do some back mapping that will impact PD if they do adjust that assessment. We are going to follow tighter timelines, which Caroline is going to actually walk you through what that would look like at the school level. And then that communication plan that again is really about those tight timelines. So kind of 3 areas for us to be thinking about when we think of Act 20 within DPI, within what is the district and central office need to be planning, and then what is that impact for schools at this moment. Next slide, please.
All right, so Act 20, as comprehensive as it is, it speaks explicitly about English literacy, which then creates this opportunity for us to continue to engage in dialogue with the Department of Public Instruction on what is the meaning of it, or how is it that Act 20 and all of its pieces are going to make sense in dual language immersion programs, developmental bilingual program, and for our English language learners. The opportunity exists because it is explicit about English literacy, but it is, as I said, creating this opportunity. So we continue to lift our value for multilingual learning, for biliteracy. We are working alongside our CISA and other districts across the state, and we're advocating together to be able to bring more clarity connected to bilingual programs in it. So more to come on that. Next slide, please. In the other hand, Act 20 is positioning us very, very well for students with IEPs, because the Department of Public Instruction already provides detailed guidelines that tell us what is the process that we need to engage in for identifying students with the specific learning disabilities in the area of reading. So if you are a student that has an IEP that falls in the 25th percentile and you have a reading goal, we can lever the IEP as your reading plan for Act 20. So we are very nicely positioned for students with disabilities in relationship to Act
Great, thank you. So this slide is specifically relates to our school implementation timeline. So and this assumes that we're implementing our new science-based reading curricula that we previously talked about. And this is really kind of where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. So I'm gonna just walk generally through this, but again, as Becky alluded to, as well as Gabby, and Cindy, we are situated very nicely to implement this, these state statutes, in accordance with our early literacy plan. So we are on a good path for that. So as previously mentioned, DPI is procuring the 4K through 3rd grade universal reading screener. We currently do use FastBridge for 5K through 3rd grade screening. And fortunately, this tool meets all of the criteria set forth within Act 20. And our schools engage in various forms of data routines that approximate this school process and timeline that you see here. Yet, as you'll see in the data, we do have a fair number of students who will meet the criteria of being below the 25th percentile.
Yeah.
And so that's really where this timeline gets tight. So we are going to have to really think thoughtfully about our users who are most close to this timeline to really plan with them in terms of executing on this timeline. However, this basic process of data review and routines, understanding where kids are kind of across the continuum of outcomes and doing some level of diagnostic screening is really something that our schools are used to doing. So it really just, you know, it implicates us in terms of thinking through some documentation requirements and that timeline as well. So as we continue to hone our early literacy plan, Act 20 does afford us the opportunity to systematically implement our data routines, our additional diagnostic assessment and notifications across the year with specific timelines in mind. And so as you can see here, after the screening is administered, the school will identify students in grades kindergarten through 3rd who fall below that 25th percentile. And then, as I mentioned before, they would, schools would then undertake some more diagnostic assessment to understand specific skill gaps or to potentially rule out any false positives. So we have to, you know, verify our data to ensure accuracy of it. And then in accordance with best practices, schools send home the results of the literacy screener. And this is a current practice. So we do send home results. And now we're obligated to do this within 15 days of giving the screener. So again, that's just necessitating us in terms of tightening up the timeline. And then, you know, we know that teachers are committed to improving the literacy outcomes for all of our students. And as such, with our new science-based literacy curricula and current data routines, we have supported teachers in thinking through various strategies to promote skill acquisition, such as differentiation, scaffolding, reteaching, and targeted skills instruction. And while we have a great foundation from which to draw on here, as Becky was mentioning, this personalized approach to thinking about our students' early foundational reading skills has not been documented anywhere beyond probably teacher notes. And so in alignment with Act 20, our early literacy plan will articulate the how, when, and where personalized reading plans are created and communicated with families. So again, it really affords us that opportunity to tighten up our practices and ensure that as kids move on to subsequent grades, that we understand the work that's been done to ensure that we're meeting their needs and that we're closing skills gaps. And then for those students who receive intensive intervention in addition to core instruction, we already document these plans in EduClimber and communicate these plans and progress with families. So that's another situation which we have to look to be able to inform what we would do for personalized reading plans. And then next slide, please. Moving on to a data slide, and just to, this is a lot. So let me just,
Magnifying glass.
let me,
No, I'm like, as I lean in here.
yeah, so I'll just orient briefly.
Yeah, we know how.
This data set is only one data set, okay? This is not all the data we're looking at. I'm gonna give you kind of a sample of what we're looking at to just guide our early literacy plan, but this data is important to us because we have to think through when we think of that school implementation timeline, we have to think about like, how many students are we talking about?
Yeah.
And so what this tells you is you can look across from kindergarten to 5th grade, and the top and the orange bars are all students, and they're 3 years worth of data, starting with the furthest back, so I think it's 21, 22, up to last year. And so you can see all students, and then our focus groups underneath there. And so the grades K and 1 represent our FastBridge results on our early reading English composite. And then grades 2 through 5 are reading, a curriculum-based measure in reading. So it's a fluency measure also in FastBridge in English. And so really, in order to know how to support schools in implementation, we must see that the system that has produced these outcomes to adequately define our problem and articulate our desired outcomes. Our district team is looking at multiple sources of data. So beyond this is just a snapshot to highlight our timeline, but we're looking at student outcomes, learner demographics, programs and processes and perceptions to ensure we know the why and the how we want to improve. So this, again, just one data set. And so here are a couple key takeaways from the data set. We have more positive movement or trends in the earlier grades, so kindergarten through 2nd, although grades 1 and 2 do have the highest rates of students scoring below the 25th percentile. And again, these high rates indicate that we really must be user-centered in our approach to school implementation. Students with IEPs have had positive trends across nearly all grade levels. Identifying as Black or African American have had positive trends in the early grades, and however, disparities across our racial and ethnic groups and other demographic groups continue to persist. As we think about our continuous improvement efforts in the area of early literacy, we need to not only think about our outcome goals, but also our process goals. And so this concept emphasizes the idea that we must focus on the processes by which we want to get better to see the improvements that we desire. And so really having those strong processes and disciplined routines that will be in our plan and supporting teachers and school leadership in place are critical to improvement. So getting good at getting better necessitates shifting from thinking of improvement as an intention, something that we're hoping for, to really investing in more formal methods to actually achieve it. This concept aligns not only with our focus on improvement and all we do in MMSD this year, but also will be operationalized through our early literacy plan in alignment with Act 20. All right, and so I will hand it over to Cindy, who will take us through implications.
Thank you. So before we open it up for discussion, we just wanted to name some of the implications that we believe our early literacy plan aligned to Act 20 are going to require us to think about. So again, a lot of good things for us to celebrate that we were one step ahead in terms of where the state was around some of this decision making. So we feel really good about where our district is positioned to begin this work. And also understand that as Caroline Becky and Javi just outlined, there's some things that we need to really think about moving forward. Some of those are thinking about what this means for staffing, licensure, and new hiring and onboarding. So one of the requirements of the Act 20 is that staff have completed training aligned to the science of reading. As a system, we know we've already started that work because we've been doing the work around letters. And so thinking about what that means moving forward for us and how we codify that and create that as part of our onboarding or verification will be really important. We've already been having conversations with MTI and thinking about what that means for handbook implications, most specifically related to what I just mentioned, as well as professional development. So that's something. And then the team already mentioned this, but I'll uplift again. There are some policies that will require us to revisit. One being our promotion policy 3537, as well as we think about our back to graduation plan, which is our PI 25. Some of the other things that we really need to think about before I talk about at the school level is what this means around our community partnerships, our community organizations, and where we really have a call to action around thinking about the work of early literacy and rally together in order to ensure that in every way we're thinking about for our students and what that might mean in terms of some of our current community partners through tutoring, community-based organizations, et cetera. Some of the other things that have implications are the way we have our schools organized in terms of their systems and structures to think about some of those documentation and processes as well as the assessment staffing in order to ensure that we're doing right by our children at early literacy. What does that mean in terms of what we need to think about in terms of who we have in our buildings and how we staff them? We've named the professional learning a few times. There's definitely going to be some learning that we'll want to ensure there's time for. And then really that family engagement piece. I think Becky and Caroline both highlighted that in terms of making sure that while we've done some of this work in the past, it's really going to afford us an opportunity to improve what we are communicating to families when and how, and what we're doing in terms of bringing families in as partners. And so that's going to be something that we will be really working on now until the future. We already have been starting to do some of that planning. I think that's probably where we are at right now for implications. I'm sure there's a host of other things that we have either started planning or will come up as we continue this work. But for right now, I will turn it back over to you, Board Chair Muldrow, and I think we can open it up for discussion.
Board Member Simkin.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we can go back to the dates slide for a minute. In looking at the difference between kindergarten and first grade, I'm wondering if you can explain why we have such a jump in the number of students that are now, that then start falling below that 25th percentile.
That's a very good question. We're actually investigating that right now to see if it's like an actual thing or if it's a statistical artifact of the test. And so we will have more later on that. We're getting closer, but it's not that our students are actually getting worse, for lack of a better term, but it is part of the way the test is compiled and put together. So more on that later, but that's a good question to ask, because that's, you know, we don't want our students to come in and we have results that look the way they do. So we have that same question and are investigating it. Okay, thank you.
Board President Nichols.
Yes. Can I just also I have some other questions, but related to the data, I just want to confirm that when we're looking at the numbers, let's say for 23-24, and we see that 873
For first grade.
Yeah.
for first grade. That's first graders all across the district.
Yes.
And so that 50% is 50% of all first graders would be falling below the 25th percentile. Okay. And should I assume that you all also have a way of looking at the data that can tell you kind of how that spreads out across schools? Because there could be some schools with way higher numbers
Yes.
of those students than others.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Those aren't really my questions, but I just wanted to confirm that. Okay.
Now on the clock.
Now on to my question. So one of the things that you mentioned this already, around implications, but let's just talk about the hiring piece. So what I saw in the act and what I know you stated, but I was in the act, is that by July 1st, 2025, all individuals employed as a 5K to grade 3 teacher or reading teacher will need to begin a reading training that meets the following criteria, and then they outline. Okay. So that tells me that as new people are applying to come into the district, there's a certain pathway that those folks, we're going to need to ensure that they're going to meet the requirement. And then you have all the people that are currently employed that you also will need to assure that they would meet the requirement, right? And we still have until July 1st of 2025, so that gives us some time, but there's some HR implications on that in terms of being able to, one, verify somebody new coming into the system, but then also verify people who are currently employed. So you may have said this at one of our previous work groups, and I don't remember, so just bear with me. Have we developed a system internally that we feel confident about that is showing us how our educators are completing the letters training? Because I'm assuming the letters training would qualify for this requirement. And are we, or is that something we're still working through, like knowing who has completed and being able to know like where people are in the progression of letters?
So I could start and then
Okay.
if anyone else wants to jump in. So the short answer is yes.
Okay,
The letter system has a really easy way for us to review every single individual that holds a license, meaning you hold a license, you are in the process of being trained, and where you are towards the completion of that.
okay,
Our team generates actually a monthly report now that shows every staff person by school in terms of where they are towards what we call milestones.
okay,
Right now, we have it set that you have to finish a certain unit by a certain moment in time, and each year we're saying 2 units, 3 units, whatever it may be in terms of a milestone.
okay,
So yes, I think the piece that we're still working out is how we have that more automated to HR. So that is a system that is through Lexia that we
Okay.
access, and again, our team creates spreadsheets and we're able to do it and check and verify. But that doesn't talk to an HR system, so there is a piece of potential merging files together and or manual review for that right now.
got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I will just add one other thing to what you had asked is we have already been working with our HR team to try and be in front of this a year early to think about how some of these practices will work in terms of new hires, onboarding, and again, we are excited that we already started letters, which is approved as our way to go. But how do we have new staff come in and show that they've already completed that? You can have a certificate that shows you've completed that
okay,
versus having to do that on. So those are some of the things that are in progress with us right now in our HR team.
okay, thank you for that. The other thing I noticed about the act, and you, Caroline, you already just talked about this, but I do want to just follow up. So around the family notification, which the 15 days, that's no joke. That's a lift. Okay, especially when we're looking at the amount of students that we're talking about. So I guess one question that I have is, and you may not have the answer tonight, but I just want to surface it. You know, a lot of our handbook currently talks about kind of early release time, as having time to do kind of prep or prep time is time for kind of your preparation for the direct instruction, the way I've understood it, and that there could be some professional learning maybe as a staff. But I'm curious if we think we may have to move in the direction of actually building in time specifically for these assessments that are different than the ways that we've done the assessments previously. And I don't know enough to know, because I know you said, well, we've already sent families
Yeah,
information, but I don't know if it's been within the 15-day window.
correct, right.
Yeah,
And then the additional, the additional requirement of doing diagnostic assessment, which we certainly do with some students based on our resources and our current data structure that we have.
mhm,
And so we also have to inform families of the diagnostic assessment results within 10 days. So that's a lot. as well, to do in addition. And so some of the things, and please jump in, that we've talked about, were in consultation with MTI and Calendar, how can we leverage, maybe Ready, Set, Go conferences, or maybe we move up parent-teacher conferences, to be in alignment with when the results come in so that we can connect with families meaningfully and authentically. And so like, what can we adjust structurally, to your point? I think we could also, and of course, on the docket with our plan here is to really go to school level users and talk through it with them, and see what makes sense, and maybe try out some stuff this year so that we, before we go to large scale implementation, we have ideas, because now we just almost finished winter screening for those that did it. And so we have an opportunity to practice something because we have things ready to go. And I might have been losing my thought. I lost my.
That's okay. No, I mean, I'm just happy to hear that you all have already started thinking about like what are some other structures?
I know.
Yeah.
So other things is like, okay, well, we're not gonna do, like, not every grade at K through 3 are going to administer their screening at the exact same time. So they're gonna look at their window and they're gonna say, maybe third grade is going to be in the first week of our window. Second grade isn't, the second, right? And so it's staggered. And so that you're not like draining all of your resources by grade level at once is just kind of another thing that we've been thinking through that would be maybe less of a burden on schools. So we'll have to think about that, a little bit more systematically, in terms of how best to do that. But the importance of having those systems and structures in place at the schools, like the key teams that we want to have in schools, right? Like, so, kind of like a core leadership team, who is a conduit to, helping grade level teams think through their processes, and who's doing what, right? Like, it's not, this can't fall on teachers alone. So we have to like work as a system to ensure that we have the necessary infrastructure to be able to implement.
Okay, well, I'm happy to hear that you all have started trying to think about like, what do we currently already have in our handbook, in our calendar? What could we maybe reimagine and repurpose? While I strongly believe in families knowing what's happening with their children, I also read that timeline and was like, oh, wow, that changes the whole way in which a teacher could be thinking about bringing forward the joy of reading.
Right.
Okay, because it didn't read very joyfully.
No.
Okay. Then related to that is, some years ago, we moved to a standards-based report card. And report cards are also another way that families have an idea of how their children are doing. And I'm curious if you've started to think through, what does it mean if your kid has this reading screener? The reading screener says they're in the bottom 25th percentile, which means they need more intervention and support, and yet they're developing and emerging and lots of other beautiful things, right, as a young learner. And how do you bring kind of a holistic view to parents around your young one? We want to support your young one in their reading, and we have a growth mindset around how they're developing. So I don't know if you've thought about that, but like, how will this work with a standards-based report card?
I think ideally what we talked about was the importance of actually having meetings with families, which is why our initial conversation was, is there a way to kind of readjust RSGs in elementary school, or like, do we bump conferences up to October? Because what I know, right, is I can send a letter home and it's a check, it was sent home, but really where did we engage families in that conversation to really deeply understand what it is, like what's happening for their child. We also know, to be honest, a 15-minute conference, which is what we currently have set up, is actually not going to meet the needs for
Right.
this circumstance. So I think there has to be at some point a conversation around what does that really look like when we talk about conferences, where does it fall in the calendar? The timeline of like using resources for assessment is very tricky in a school because it does, your school psych is pulled in, your interventionist, like your coach, everybody is kind of called in to think about that. But also then that would be those times for teachers to be able to meet. And I don't think that we can say like, hey, you're all going to do these meetings after school. Some schools are going to have, right, 75% of their kids or more, and some schools are going to have less. And so I think we have to think about that resource as well. But if we rethink like what family engagement and family partnership really looks like, which is like being at the table with the families to understand, it's a very different conversation, you know? So schools that have done that in this past year have seen pretty significant changes for families' engagement with their child in their learning. And that also then pairs with an opportunity for teachers to be able to give families some additional resources based upon their targeted skills. So again, though, a lot of it is about restructuring some of those kind of traditional sense of conferences at this quarter, conferences in April, maybe it's a bump back. You know, we moved middle school conferences years ago, but like, it would be great if we had conferences in February at elementary school because they would have just finished assessment window there. So I think it's about a little bit of restructure, but more importantly, how are we actually engaging families? Not just sending a stinking letter home. Because that's what we do. Here's a letter check.
The
I
only thing.
was being snarky over here. I turned to Lisa and I was like, do you remember when I worked at MMC? On family engagement? Anyway. Go ahead, Cindy,
No,
sorry.
I was just gonna say, just to kind of go back to the question around report cards, we have not had a conversation about thinking about revamping or revising them, but I think that what we have uplifted in the past was how you use a body of evidence, which is kind of all of the things that are supposed to showcase kind of how the student is along their trajectory towards mastery. And I think if we continue to think about that as a way to talk about what one assessment says and then what the progress is that the student can showcase over that period of time, I think that balances out some of what you were addressing.
Okay. And then my last question is, I know that you indicated that the guidance on the promotion policy will come later, but I was still reading on it, okay? And what I do think is notable is that our current promotion policy talks about promotion from 4th to 5th grade. And Act 20 is honing in on 3rd grade.
Yeah,
Yes.
just adding.
Right. And so I think what I'm curious about is would we have to, without knowing all of the details, am I understanding this correctly, that we would have to add something to our promotion policy that talks about a student
Definitely,
promoting from 3rd to 4th grade?
definitely.
And then we would still probably, or maybe keep or expand our knowledge about the 4th to 5th grade?
Then you would have to. Yes,
Okay.
so they will be writing in something about 3rd grade students, right? At end of 3rd grade, going into 4th grade is what that language is going to be. I think just a timing piece here will be really important to think about. Per DPI, that language is supposed to be to us in the spring, early summer of 25. However, we know that as we begin planning for our summer semester, it is this moment in time now. And so really trying to get ahead of that as much as possible and push DPI to give us that language sooner so that we can make decisions around our own policy will be really important. I mean, we can plan forward as much as we know about what it means for 3rd grade, but that is going to be something that's important. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Board Vice President Pearson.
Yeah, so thanks, Nichelle, for those questions, because I definitely had very similar questions about them, so some of it was answered. The question I have about the EduClimb, or actually the results being sent home, was just more so around like what we are currently doing. Is there any like data or any kind of quality assurance that we've built in to like understand what the trends are? Like if we're sending it through the report card or sending it home, are we getting it back? Are we getting like 30% back or something like that? So then we kind of have an idea of like what is working and not working, and we can kind of stop doing something and do something different.
So right now, schools send home letters of the fall screening results and spring results, but right now our middle of the year is optional. When they send home at those times, they send home according to what families registered for during the enrollment process. So if they wanted it via email, they'd send it via email or send it home backpack or mail. We don't have information in terms of if it was received, other than if we were to be communicating with families and knowing that, and we couldn't know that at a system level. We do have the capability coming for next year to send those letters that meet the state statute requirements in terms of what all of the recommendations are. We have that already in place. But we have the ability to send that via email with a return signature.
Okay.
So we're looking at having that as another data source, to your point, so that we would know that they're receiving them.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is just about working with like what opportunities do we have to work with community partners? Because as we know, a lot of the issue, or part of the issue, is that families, parents, and guardians may not even be at reading level themselves. And so we know that that's a barrier in households, many of the households, where we see some of the students not also meeting criteria for reading. So I guess what are our opportunities to help, like, if I'm a parent of a child who has not met the reading standard, I also cannot read. How are we connecting families with like community partners or using community partners to kind of help? Because even if we are telling the parents this is what you need to do, how do I understand that enough to know to make sure that my child gets those supports from the school? So I don't know if it's something that we've thought of, but it would be worthwhile.
Yeah, so one of the things that we have talked about is we're kind of in the process of beginning to do what I would call a roadshow, going out to all of the different stakeholders to begin to talk about what this work means for us here in MMSD and what we need from others. And so right now, and I can't remember on our timeline, but I know spring or early summer, we talked about pulling all of our current community partners together, as well as other community partners, to begin to talk about this work and how, again, we allocate resources differently to support the work on early literacy. So right now we have many partners that might support the area of literacy, but how do we build their understanding of what this work means and how we might have to make some adjustments to support how we can align some of our community centers and neighborhood centers to ensure that they also know this so that they can be on board. So that's something that we've been working with the partnerships office in terms of thinking about that. I think that as we continue to get closer to that date, we'll want to think about where we have opportunities to improve, grow, or shift what we're doing, but that is what we've been thinking about. We know that this cannot happen without the work of all of our community.
Right. And then okay, so then I was just gonna ask about, so Nichelle asked a question just about the certifications, and I think I got the answer for that, but there's another part of once I don't know if you've thought of this, but once in a couple years, once those requirements are in place and we're kind of like going through it and we've done what we can, do you anticipate, because the requirement is statewide, do you anticipate after a couple years us not necessarily have to be so aggressive on the hiring pieces because everyone will be required to have like some kind of science of reading credentials.
I think it's not just, yes, and I think it's not just that. One of the conversations is with the post-secondary institutions. And
Yeah.
working with post-secondary and having that be a requirement in all of our teacher ed programs. So that they're coming out of their teacher ed program with that science of reading training and boom, coming into the school district. So that is where we are at right now. We've been in conversation with UW-Madison just through the early literacy task force, and that's been something we've been working on. But as a state, that is part of the conversation in terms of those requirements being part of teacher ed programs. And hopefully that moves as quickly as the work we're having to do.
That's great, that's great. That's all the questions I have at the time, other than some budgetary, just how I budget, but I'll open it.
Board Member Mosner Falcon?
Thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry I'm not with you tonight. I miss you all. Thanks for your work on this. I have a couple of questions and then one sort of like perennial concern that I'll put here as usual. My first is like about how we are talking about this with children and how we're talking.
Claire, you became inaudible momentarily. Do you want to try again?
I'm not used to that. Yeah, sure. I sound okay now?
You're
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Okay. My first question is about, did you hear me say thank you and all that stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It was a brief second that blurred the first sentence of what you were going into.
My question is about how we're talking to kids about it and how we're making sure that the work that's coming out of this department is super in tune with whatever work is coming out of our student services department. So that when we're talking to children about their progress, we're doing it in a way that builds up to Nichelle's point, or Board President Nichols's point, like their growth mindset. That's something that concerns me. So I want to hear that like that work is underway and like is aligned. My second question is about the implications for professional learning. And wondering like what standards or what like processes we have or might develop that help us make clear decisions about PD priorities. Whenever there's like, conflict over time, right? We only have so much professional development time. Professional educators only have so much intellectual capacity to learn and implement new things. And given that that's always going to be a struggle, I wonder about how we do that systematically. And then the last sort of my perennial concern is that we don't let new legislation from folks who generally speaking don't know much about schools, right? This is not their specialty. And they're responding to problems that are real, but not with the insight that public school workers at the school level and in administration have. And so much like I was concerned a few months ago that like, okay, we're gonna go with these like 4 super duper quantitative metrics to monitor our progress, right? Like fine, right? Fine, this act is this act. But how are we being really careful about the pitfalls of that and making sure that we're filtering this through our MMSD vision and our MMSD core beliefs so that we don't get cornered into making bad choices for kids because they're the easiest ones to meet the requirements of the statute. So it was 2 questions and just a perennial concern to put in the space.
I'm just gonna chime in real quick on that last piece. I think that is exactly why we wanted to lead with this is our work in MMSD and how we are aligning it to Act 20 and all of the work that we've already started and how we're ensuring that that's the pieces we're uplifting. while there may be a few things, yes, that we have to follow in terms of requirements, we are definitely leading with the work that we started years ago in MMSD. So I appreciate that. I'm gonna turn it to Gabi and Becky to answer your question, because I feel like that was present in November when our team was here talking about where we are around this. But I'll let those two chime in and answer that first question for you.
Go ahead.
You start.
So your first question was really thinking about like the whole child and how we are talking about that. I think a couple things happen, right? How do we talk with students about what they know and are able to do, and how are they also able to kind of track that? I know that teachers keep track of portfolios of student work, right? Over the course of time, and you celebrate student success. They kind of can see even something as simple as how your handwriting has changed over the course of the year. As I recently just left a school, I just remember our first graders like seeing, right, that beginning of the year writing and what that looked like over time. And they would come down, right, to show me in my office, like, look at how much my writing has changed, or come in and listen to me read. So I think kids have a really good grasp of where they are within their own skill development. What I do know is that when teachers are really targeting their instruction, students are also really specific about it. Goal setting changes. Again, I think, a couple months ago, you had a couple teachers that spoke about that, where they were saying, like, my students are talking about, my goal is about blends, and that's what I'm working on, or I'm going to be working on segmenting. And so like kids, when teachers are very clear about the work that they're doing, students are also clear about the work they're doing. And then they feel like they can target some of that. That also being said is that what we know is that the culture of learning is about your whole day, especially in elementary school. And teachers are continuously working to be thinking about, like, how am I setting up my systems and structure to make sure that I'm attending to my students as learners and celebrating those small wins. We know we've been partnered with Student Services over the course of this year to really think about what does that look like around, like, what are the structures that happen within core practices to make sure that we are doing that work. So how are we teachers modeling positive behavior, not just about behavior, but also about academics? And how do we transition from a small group to another small group to another small group? I think in Madison, we do a really good job of like thinking through all of those pieces in a student's day in an elementary school. Having been in all 32 since the beginning of the year in walkthroughs, but then in learning walks, but then currently in longer learning walks, what we're seeing is that teachers have really strong practices around modeling their positive behavior, as well as the transitions that are happening within their spaces. So I think when we do think about how are we attending to social emotional learning, we're in a pretty good space around that. Now, of course, there's always going to be instances where we are continuing to think about our professional learning. And so we do have monthly professional development with coaches, where we are working specifically around targeted core instructional practices, and bringing them back then to schools. And the coaches are bringing them back to their buildings specifically. Anything else to add?
Yes, two things. I would say that we are working with a great amount of intentionality with the social emotional learning team, and also with the state and federal team to be inclusive of all student populations, connected to instruction and the ways in which students see themselves and the way in which we're seeing growth and progress. I would say that a beautiful thing that is coming on the day-to-day connected to the adoption is this idea of quality work. And seeing the process and the progress as important or more important than the product at the end. And that has really shifted our ways of working, interacting, and have supported students into really powerful behaviors, right? And ownership on their own learning. So this one too.
As far as professional development time, I think, you nailed it always. No matter what, we will never feel like we have enough time. We are in the process of really kind of mapping things out moving forward this next year, and then thinking about the future years as well, around where are we with things that are most close to students, right? Like, how are we prioritizing the things that are closest to students, and then coming further out to think about what are additional things that we need to develop teachers, and knowing that there's always a variation as we have many new staff coming into the building or into our district, that we have to also attend to new needs as well as those of veteran staff too. So I think that's always going to be a balancing act. But what I do know is that teachers have continued to talk about that, like they need like a good solid chunk of time when they start to dig into some of this work. And so I think, you know, like as a board, as a district, how are we thinking about bigger chunks of time? Because you can't literally sit down and plan a student's plan just in that like hour if you're going to sit and do those things. Like, you do need a chunk of time for your mindset to be able to engage in that work too.
Board Member Castro.
Thank you. I'm wondering if y'all have any indication on how this will change our existing assessment schedule.
It won't really change per se, in that we do offer the screening in the fall, the winter, and the spring. It will change it in the winter in terms of it will be required and not optional.
Okay, and forgive me, I do think you mentioned this already. Is this screening, do we get to choose that screening, or is this a screen that comes from the state?
So the state is choosing the assessment screening tool for us this coming year. So 24-25. And hopefully to have that decision by July, they say.
One thing I want to add to this is the state is determining that screening for English only. As a reminder, as we use FastBridge, we use it in our DLI settings as well for English and Spanish. So something that we're just wanting to continue to uplift is our focus and our by literacy, while the state is focused so on English. When it comes, even when it comes to assessment.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think as with a lot of our assessments, I just think it'll be ever more important to inform parents and students of their rights with respect to participating in these screens.
Thank you, Board Member Castro. Before we move on to the next subject, I want to thank board members for their questions this evening. I also want to acknowledge that we haven't talked about advanced learners or our students who are assessed as doing particularly well in the area of literacy. I also want to acknowledge that we haven't talked about how gender impacts what literacy looks like in early childhood. And so I guess my only questions around this conversation is, you know, kind of where does Act 20 end and our own commitment to our students across the board kick in? We do have a significant number of students who are proficient in the area of literacy and are advanced in the area of literacy. And I think oftentimes if their parents tune into our meeting, they're not getting the sense that we are excited to support their student in achieving. I also think that sometimes when we have these conversations, our emphasis becomes really deficit based. And I do hope that when we're talking about literacy, that we're able to emphasize areas of strength for even our students who are struggling. And so I guess I want to ask kind of where do our advanced learners fall into this plan in this current moment? And how do we kind of make sure that when we're having those initial conversations, which kids really perceive as descriptions of their abilities and intelligence, right? Kids feel defined by those test scores. We make them really important. How do we make sure kids know, you know, the areas that they want to work on, but also the areas where they are great, where they are really, you know, showing up and doing good work.
I'll be happy to start with that question and then pass it over to my colleagues. I think that, it goes back to what I think I said to Blair also, like this plan isn't necessarily the DPI plan, this is MMSD's plan, and our plan around early literacy is focused on all students. Our work in the area of advanced learning, I think, has really, especially this year, has a focus on K2 and ensuring that we're doing a better job of uplifting our students that are defined as advanced learners in K2. It's the focus area. We're excited to come back and talk to the board about our overall advanced learning plan later in the spring, but that is where we have emphasized. So I think advanced learning, as well as all students, live in our literacy work, and all students are going to be showcasing both their areas of improvement as well as their areas of growth. I think that also goes back to what Becky and Gabby talked about in terms of how we show our portfolio of evidence or a body of evidence for all students in terms of what they're doing and doing well, and how I think Michelle mentioned it, how we make sure that we're also uplifting the love of reading, and this doesn't become a compliance driven approach, but we are truly uplifting the work of literacy and biliteracy in all of our classrooms. I think the other piece that you mentioned in terms of deficit based, I hope that what everyone walks away with tonight is that from our perspective, we're excited about continuing to focus on literacy, specifically early literacy, our plan, and how a lot of the work that we were in front of before the state is showing that we're on the right course to improve outcomes for all of our students. I'll turn it over to see if any of my colleagues want to add to that.
All really, points well taken.
Thank you. I think the last thing I want to mention in terms of kind of our commitment to literacy is how much I appreciate the work folks have done to elevate the needs of our young people. I hope that we're able to emphasize retention of our staff as we continue to train and invest in our staff. I hope that is a clear strategy we're making, is keeping the people we're investing in. And Gabby, I just want to say really directly, I greatly appreciate you know, reminding us as a board that we're talking about literacy in multiple languages as a district throughout elementary school, including 4K now, and that our work has to be expansive beyond what our legislature is prescribing to us as a district. So thank you all so much for bringing your voices to the table this evening. Now we get to jump in to our main topic. So I want to make sure we've got the time to have a really important conversation about special education. Board members, you will notice that you have our last special education plan in front of you and the current draft plan. Board members also have access to several reports that are specific to special education, including the West Ed report, which was done in June of 2021. Board member Vandermeulen cannot be here this evening. She had the flu, but her and I have been in communication today. We all know how important this conversation is to her, and she does have a few questions that I plan to bring to the table towards the end of the evening. So with that, take it away, Cindy and Nancy.
Thank you so much. So yes, as a reminder, at the end of this month, at the board meeting of January 29th, the board will have an opportunity to formally approve the plan that you have. We provided a memo to you that outlines some of the improvements, changes, and additions that we've made since the last time we discussed the special education plan a few months ago. The other thing that I would like to highlight, in addition to the plan, we had an addendum that wanted to uplift some of the work we've done that sometimes doesn't live front and center in a plan as it relates to thinking about inclusivity and access to equipment such as our playground equipment. So we had invested a significant amount of funding approved by the board, which we're grateful for, where we were able to really make enhancements and improvements in the areas for our students, and we just wanted to ensure that that was added as an addendum to this memo and to the plan that we have. With that, I'll turn it over to Nancy to see if she wants to uplift anything in the memo, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Sure, so,
Dr. Moore.
oh, geez, Nancy, good.
I'm sorry.
Nancy's great. After, the last time that we talked about the special education plan draft, we added additional data, specific data to the plan, because I know that all of you had some really good questions about where the goals, just ensuring that we had the data that supported the goals that we were setting. Also added some evidence base for some of the goals based on what we had seen in our data over the last few years, and tried to highlight in the plan with revisions that our goal was to choose objectives not only based on data, but objectives that were going to be meaningful for our students and our schools to move forward with, like the West Ed report speaks a lot about graduation rates. And so thinking about what we need to do as a school district to back up our special education service delivery and our instruction for students and meet goals earlier so that our students are well prepared for moving through elementary school into middle school to high school, and then beyond high school to graduation and what they want to do after high school. So the intent of this draft plan is really to make sure that we're taking a look earlier in the lives of our students who are identified as having an IEP and support them well so that they can progress and achieve as much as they can possibly achieve, not only academically, but socially and emotionally. In addition to those pieces, we also must recognize as a school district that our disproportionality has significant impact on our students, our families, and our community. And that, yes, we're identified by the Department of Public Instruction as having significant disproportionality, but that piece really needs to be less important to us than the actual impact it has on the lives of children. And the way that they see themselves moving through our education system. And so that's why we put that goal front and center, along with academic achievement and inclusive opportunities, which we know go hand in hand with our culture and climate in our schools.
Anything else you want to uplift before we turn it over to the board?
I think those are my primary thoughts coming in.
Thank you. All right. Question, discussion from the board, and Jesse, no, that's okay. As is. Feel like people have questions, discussions, but I don't see anybody at this point. I have Nikki's questions, so I'm gonna go with those for now.
Sounds good.
So Nikki's 3 questions were more transition opportunities for our 18 to 21-year-old students, if you're able to speak to that this evening. Need for actual progress plan that are specific to individuals, and a timeline for progress. And the timeline for progress, according, I think this is a comment, is too slow. So that's what I have from board member Andrew.
Sure. In thinking about our opportunities for students who are beyond 12th grade, but for whom their IEP team has decided that additional services are needed to help them reach their goals. And so that's how that decision is made. As a student enters 11th grade is typically when the IEP team would make that decision by the time the student is entering 11th grade, whether or not they were likely going to or going to need transition services beyond the 12th grade. And so our district is really a leader in terms of transition services for students with an IEP who have those identified needs. We have very strong school-based transition services that emphasize the 3 post-school objectives that we know we have to help them try to reach based on IDEA and just based on life, knowing that we want to help them have independent living skills, employment skills, and do some job training or post-secondary education. So we have Campus Connect, which is very unique to the Madison School District. There are very few school districts that offer that opportunity for students with an IEP to have dual credits at a college with supports from teachers in a school district. We also have a Project Search program that supports students annually, which emphasizes employability skills. And then our high school programs also emphasize employability skills for our students and stress having work opportunities, paid work experiences prior to leaving high school is the #1 predictor of working after high school for students with significant learning support needs. And so I would be more than happy to talk with Board Member Vandermeulen or anyone who has additional ideas. We'd be happy. We're very committed to our transition services in the school district, so I would be happy to help entertain any other ideas that people have beyond what we offer currently. And I would also be happy to take people on tours of any of those school-based transition programs, Campus Connect or Project Search, because they're just really phenomenal programs, but I'd really be happy to continue to talk about it. It's also my passion. I was a transition teacher for almost all of my years as a special education teacher and have worked in transition for it's near and dear to my heart for sure. So I would be happy to do that. So the next question that Board Member Vandermeulen had was about the goals.
Yes, it was
Okay.
about monitoring progress and communicating around progress.
Sure. And so I'm not sure if Board Member Vandermeulen meant individual students or the plan. So I mean, I can
She meant individual students. I can
Sure.
actually go back.
And I can-
to the question.
sure.
We need actual progress plans that are specific to individual students.
Sure, yep, so I can speak to that. So I think that backing that up even further, one of the pieces that we address within the plan is the need to ensure that our special education teachers and IEP teams are thinking about grade level standards and connecting goals for our students to grade level standards. So I think that's a first step that we've been stressing for the last year and need to continue to do so. And then in special education, there's a requirement for quarterly progress monitoring for all students with an IEP. So our special education teachers and related services staff, where they are participating in instruction around goals for a student, need to monitor that progress and then write a quarterly progress report that is in our system, which is Go IDEA, and also those progress reports get sent to families on a quarterly basis. So I see it as a need to ensure that we're helping write the right goals for students that are connected to grade level progress and their academic and social and emotional growth, and then making sure that we have the progress monitoring system. So we have systems in place. I just think there's continued opportunity for our staff to learn how to make it as meaningful as possible for students and families and their planning for their future.
The only thing I would add that's
Sure.
not about the individual student, but just important to note is, we had talked about this when we were in front of you a few months ago, but the commitment for this plan to have annual monitoring reporting as well, that will be shared with the Board of Education based on the metrics that we have. So, in case part of our question was about that as well.
Yep, that's a great point. And I will say that starting last year, the student services administrators and myself put together a data sheet for each school based on the metrics that we have been looking at even prior to this plan being before you today. And so we have a data sheet from last year for every single school with all of these metrics and additional metrics. And we have a plan in place. We work with our program support teachers to actually look at some of the metrics quarterly. And then other metrics are annual, like the academic, achieving academic proficiency in reading and math at each level. So we have a data sheet for each school and for each level that will help us to track the progress toward our goals plan.
Thank you.
Or any other goal that we wind up coming up with. Based on your view.
I have a couple of questions that are specific to comparing the two plans. I also have a question about the utilization of the West Ed review of special education. That review took place between 2019 and 2021. I also just want to ask, as we move forward in passing this plan, that board members think about, you know, kind of what you need to be able to vote for this plan at the end of the month. So my first question is really easy. If we were to pass this plan at the end of the month, when would we start to craft the next plan? Or I hope it's easy.
No, I think it's easy. So I would say that we as a school district need to evaluate after the end of the school year what our data look like. With regard to these metrics, if this, and I believe that these metrics are important whether this plan passes as is or if we revise it and add additional metrics to it. But that we would want to assess what our data look like to determine, like, are we gonna 100% stay the course with the goals? I believe they're the right ones, but we always want to evaluate, I think, from year to year, even without a whole new plan. But my thinking is that this plan is kind of underway at this moment. If we're adjusting it, we adjust it, and it may turn over to another 3 years beyond this, depending on what happens with all of you and your thoughts about this. But we want to continuously be thinking about what we want to do next with regard to service delivery, with regard to goals. I also believe that staying the course to some degree over a period of years is what helps the system really change and shift and what helps people's thinking shift. But this plan would be wrapping up if it gets passed at the end of the 2025-26 school year. So we would be looking at the next 3-year plan sometime in the fall. We would be starting to write that to bring it to you. I mean, we would set up a timeline, obviously, with the board.
So what I heard you
around
speak
that.
to, and I just want to make sure I got this right, is it's a living document. This plan can change and be adjusted as we move along to embrace best practice. What I also heard you say is that in the fall of 2025, the board should start having another conversation about the next 3-year plan.
Correct. Yeah, yes. I would also say that the piece that's we've really built to be a living document is the special education service delivery component that got pulled out of like the larger plan, and now it's really 2 separate documents. And that living piece of the plan we're reviewing on a quarterly basis as a department. So just do we have all the right resources, interventions, instructional strategies in place for students with different needs?
Thank you. I saw a series of goals related to disproportionality within this plan. I saw a significant commitment to anti-racist IEPs kind of echoed throughout this plan. I am curious about kind of where strengths fit into our plan and into our relationship with our special education students. Yeah, so I guess how are we kind of looking at the assets our young people bring to the table when they're students with disabilities or students who have, you know, significant learning needs? What is our commitment to their strength, and how is that uplifted in the special education plan? If I'm missing it, please direct me to a page.
Sure, yeah, the place where it lives in the plan probably the most strongly is on page 11. The description of our anti-racist evaluation and IEP processes So these tools, so we have two tools that are listed here in the plan, and that through the electronic version, everyone has access to these two tools. So page 11 of the plan draft. So the anti-racist IEP criteria itself, within the criteria itself that staff have now been using for 2 years. So this is our 3rd year using that tool, or having special education case managers use that tool. It emphasizes considering students' strengths, and also not using deficit-based language for our students of color in our school district who have an IEP. And then the rubric and reflection form that staff use have them specifically reflect on their practice. So those two tools, I think, incorporate what you're speaking to in terms of wanting to make sure that our staff, our IEP teams, and staff in their conversations with families. So one of the things we've really stressed in this work is that staff need to have conversations with families and students themselves, and make sure that we're uplifting students' strengths and what they can do, and what they want to do, and where they want to go in their lives, and what they want to become. And then we are just now in the process of launching a pilot of our anti-racist evaluation criteria, which asks the IEP team at the review of existing data meeting to consider what multi-tier systems of support have been provided to that student, and what the responses have been before moving forward with evaluation. So that we're thinking about what supports have been provided to the student before we move forward with thinking about considering them as a student who might have special education service needs.
I think that I've struggled with this both times. We've heard about this new plan, which is if I'm a parent who doesn't necessarily think my student needs an anti-racist IEP, but more so wants to ensure that my student's IEP meets their needs, and recognizes their strength and their potential. I think there's the emphasis on the anti-racist IEP doesn't necessarily lend itself to recognizing my student's strengths inherently. So I appreciate the way you explained it and fleshed it out. And I think I still have some tension around where kind of strengths show up for our students with disabilities and our students in special education. I have two more comments, I guess, which is one, we got the West Ed MMSD review of special education, and it was a really critical review of our special education, and we got it recently, and so I'm wondering how it was factored in to this plan. The other comment I want to make is it's hard not to notice that there's about 100 pages difference between the last plan we passed and the plan we have in front of us. And there are things that are specific to kind of our holistic approach in this plan that I don't necessarily see in this plan, and I'm wondering how those things are absorbed. So one example of that is universal design, right? When we passed this plan, we were having a lot of conversations about a referendum in our facility. We still need to do a lot of work to make our facilities accessible. I so deeply appreciate Cindy emphasizing that we made our playgrounds more accessible. I think so often when we think about our students who are disabled, we think about their achievement academically. We don't necessarily think about their ability to participate in the things that make school fun and the things that make school community. That being said, I think it's really important to acknowledge, you know, that we are talking about updating the vast majority of our elementary schools. We just got a pretty intense facilities plan. I'm curious about why that doesn't factor into this plan in the same way it did the plan we got previously.
Sure. So one of the things we thought about when we were drafting the current plan that's in front of you is that the universal design for learning piece is very strongly represented in the special education services resource guide that was pulled out and separated from the plan. So it really lives really strongly in that it was all combined at one time. And then what we thought about as a district was like, we can create that as a tool, the living document, to make sure that we're constantly thinking about our practices, our tools, our strategies, our intervention materials. And then some other pieces from the former plan live in other places as well, right? So within our facilities, management and renovation documents, we as a district made a very strong commitment 3 years ago to incorporate access and UDL into all of our renovations. And so those pieces really live there. And then we also have like a continuum of services document. So we have different documents that we really wanted to make sure that this plan represented, these are our goals, these are our strategies. And because what I think we'd like to have happen is we'd like to have our staff, not only special education staff, but all staff know this, because everybody has a role, right? We've said it many times in these spaces and other spaces, all of our students are general education students first. So we wanted the plan to be user friendly enough that not only our special education staff, but other staff can also see their role in it. And so we just wanted to make it a more user friendly, like this is a working document that we're actually using and looking at these strategies and coming back to them on a regular basis.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in a little in terms of the different approach. I think what we have learned over the last 10 years is the dense plans that we have put in place in the past haven't lived and become these kind of ever evolving living documents. They've become a plan that sometimes are referenced once and sit on a shelf, if you will. And we realized based on the work that we did, we also needed to not only take a different approach in terms of what we're doing to improve outcomes, but how we're thinking about that. And so as Nancy said, we said originally we started very dense, long thing, and like that's not going to get us anywhere. How do we make sure that everyone knows this work? How do we ensure that this work is operationalized? And how do we ensure that this work becomes fluid and living? And so that is also the approach of why you don't see the plan to look and replicate what was of the past.
I greatly appreciate that. And at the same time, I think if you felt like you could look at this plan and find kind of an expansive relationship to what your student needed, you might look to this plan hoping to find those same things. And so being able to direct people to where they can find the portions of this plan that are not included could be incredibly helpful for folks who really want to know what is your plan for making a facility that works for my school. In the spirit of what you just said, Cindy, I do want to go back to that review that we got from 2019 to 2021. So often we pay for these audits and these reviews, we invest tons of time and resources, and we don't leverage them to improve our systems. How was that review leveraged to improve our system? I'm not gonna like read it to us out loud right now, but I have it in front of me, and it's a pretty critical review of our approach to special education.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that one of the things that I read the WestEd report a number of times, even before I was in this, because we got that report prior to my predecessor leaving. And one of the things that was threaded throughout that, and in a critical nature and well-deserved, was that our Black and brown scholars did not fare as well as our white scholars, right? So I think that the disproportionality, addressing disproportionality as our goal number one in the draft of the special education plan that's before us, I think is where a piece of that, a large piece of that comes forward. I don't think that the WestEd report was as explicit as that about it, but I think that was a lot of what came up for me. And then the piece about, you know, our graduation rates and what happens for our students in high school and as they're preparing to leave high school, I think that that was a period of time where we as a district needed to really assess the standards that we were holding our students in terms of graduation. And that this plan and stressing proficiency in reading and math and knowing that the percent of our scholars who can achieve that can be increased with very intentional instructional strategies and high expectations. I think that high expectations were also bubbled up a lot for me in the WestEd report. Another thing that came through for me was our need to really pay attention to who was included and who was included in general education and who had goals that were born from general education standards. And so we've tried to really represent all of those pieces in this.
Thank you so much for speaking to that, and board members, I encourage folks to go back and look at that review. I hadn't in a while, and it was really relevant to this conversation and how I plan to inform my vote moving forward. I saw board member Pearson, then board president Nichols, and then board member Simpkin. Correct me if the order's wrong, y'all.
I think that's right.
Thank you, Ali, for your questions and you here. What I don't see is a part on here where we're looking at qualitative data. And as a parent of a kid who I will say had an IEP, to graduate out of it, which I'm proud of him for. You know, the quality part of like how these anti-racist IEP criteria in working with the families and how that's going. I don't really see like much of that at all. Are you guys like tracking that, and is it possible to put it in there? Because I think it is an important data point of how folks are experiencing the process as a whole. And I'm also not a fan of anti-racist, the word, because I think too many times we use that a lot. But what does that actually mean? So that's just my first question, just about the qualitative data.
Sure. So the qualitative data that we have looked at so far with regard to the anti-racist IEP initiatives has been to actually analyze the language in the IEP themselves. And then we've stressed to our staff the need to have conversations with students and family members about how do you feel about your IEP, the language, the goals that have been written for you, the instruction that you're receiving to help you achieve your goals. And so the qualitative data is really around analyzing the language in the IEP itself, and then analyzing our post-IEP surveys that we get back, and trying some new strategies for getting survey data from families. We've historically had about a 10% response rate to those, so we want to increase that. And so we have our family ombudsperson and our program support teachers working on some additional ways, but particularly if the criteria for an anti-racist IEP has been used when writing your new IEP, we really want to hear from families and students how that process felt to them and what they think about it. And I really appreciate the feedback about the anti-racist language. That's something that we haven't considered any other language since, we started this project back 3 years ago. So appreciate.
I mean, it just means different things. What I consider anti-racist may be completely different what other people may see it as racist. And I actually have gone through 2 years of that criteria with my child. So definitely provide feedback. And then just about the community input sessions. I know that you all were doing that for a while. I haven't seen any emails or if you guys are continuing it in like 2024, 2025 and through this plan. I do see that it's mentioned here about just the evaluation and supports for families and educating and supporting family members to foster participation. I guess for me, like, what does that look like for you all? Or are you changing the ways in which you're getting the information and families to be able to participate?
Yeah, so the request of our special education case manager is to have a conversation with the student and a family member who, one or more family members ahead of the IEP itself, to talk about how has this process felt to you? What changes would you like to see in the process? How else would you like to give input? And also to change our IEP agenda to stress that family input. And so those are some of the changes that we've worked to make over the past 2 years. And I think we would be more than open to other ideas that people have on how to do that. In terms of the community input, I have had, for the past 2 years, I've had monthly meetings where I've offered family members the opportunity to come and talk about their experiences with the process, and we've talked a lot about our anti-racist work during that time, and those meetings are continuing.
Okay.
So, yep, so some are in person and some are virtual. We actually also just started separating an English presented meeting and a Spanish presented meeting, because we found that we had a number of families who wanted interpretation, and it was hard to do both at the same time.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, like I would like to see like that kind of like flushed out too, because I think it's just saying, oh, we'll educate families, like, again, what does that mean?
Sure.
To say, I'll just make a comment, I think, just from my own experience, when moving from IEP development and, where there might be a senses of a lot of deficit kind of conversations about one's child, versus having more strength-based conversations. I think that has been one of the things that have was able to, for my child to be able to grow and develop, that switch. And so I am appreciative of the work that has been done in the staff. And then it gets me to possibly a question. I don't know if it's the correct place to put it. But just, I know I'm hiring with SEAs and like where we are with that, because does this plan account for really if we are fully staffed with all SEAs, behavior resource folks and everyone, or is there something that, you know, if we are 50%, like we do schools, and so that's just a question or comment. I don't know if you guys are able to answer it or not.
So I would say, without details that I don't have in front of me, it is one of our hard to fill areas, CC staff and SEA. And we are staffed, but we're not staffed. It's an area of continuous improvement, and we're constantly thinking about improvement areas. That's why we also have the ALSI into our pipeline opportunities.
Okay. So 3% that we're looking at, I know previously someone mentioned in some other conversations, when we've talked about the plan, the 3%, is that like, do you believe that's aggressive or that's kind of midpoint? Like, I don't know. I would think that we want to go kind of more aggressive, but that's just not.
yeah, I mean, I think that as a whole district system, that those are ambitious and achievable. And I think that what's important is that we also, in conjunction, look at the school level and building level data, so that our schools that have greater disproportionality, our schools that have wider gaps between students with an IEP who are achieving proficiency in reading and math, that if we support those schools to have the objective to make greater gains more quickly through some intentional strategies, that as a system, I think these are ambitious and achievable, but I do think that for some individual schools that we need to go after more robust goals, that we really need to take a look at those schools that are struggling with one or more of these areas and support them differently, more strongly.
And just a, I'm sorry,
No,
just
go
a
ahead.
reminder,
Yeah.
when we talk about the school improvement plans at the beginning, that we get an expectation as well that schools around for disproportionality. So why we as a system are focused on 3% schools have more specific goals and can make more. That is something that the school will head into their improvement plan.
And including academic achievement
And will those, would those get added then to this, like as this living document is created so that there's some type of monitoring as well, or will it only live with the school?
They are referenced as, they're referenced as being dovetailed with the special education plan that our school improvement plans also speak to disproportionality and achievement for students with an IEP.
Yeah, I think we'll report out, as we said, the annual report will be a roll-up of system-wide data, but as you mentioned, they have school.
Okay. Thank you.
Board President.
Well, first I want to just say that I appreciate the work that's been done on the plan to include some of the data and I can see some of the underlying theory that was driving some of the goals. I really appreciated kind of that level of visibility. And I also do like the resource guide.
Yeah.
I thought there was some really good description in here around, you know, kind of what you can expect. So I want to just start with that. So there's a couple things that I guess I'm noticing when I go through this plan. And the first one is if we just focus on goal 1, which is the whole goal on disproportionality in identification, disproportionality in inclusion, and disproportionality in discipline, right? And you put in some data sets. There are several references in the plan that talk about changes in mindsets and practices are needed to reverse the trends and close the gaps. Implicit bias training has not worked. And that both special education and general education staff must be supported to adopt these practices. And while I appreciate kind of the acknowledgement of like kind of where we are as a system, I then see the list of strategies kind of connected to this goal, and I look at these strategies and they're not compelling based on the narrative. And maybe it's because the strategies aren't clearly articulated in a way, but so if I look at the data, which I did, and I read these comments around mindset work is needed and practices must be adopted, and some of the training that we've done in the past hasn't worked to interrupt implicit bias. And then I look at the list of strategies and I see like provision of high quality early childhood options, district-wide literacy curricula, multi-level systems of support, letters training, general ed, district adoption of the integrated comprehensive systems for equity framework, targeted school improvement, like social emotional learning skill. How can I say this? Those look like all the things that we would normally be doing in our school system. They're the things that we hear about all the time at the instruction work group, right? And so what I can't tell from the strategies is what exactly is gonna address disproportionality. That's kind of where my head went. And that's not pointed at you specifically, but it is like, which of these or which set of these things do you think are the most promising in actually interrupting and getting folks to change a mindset and a practice relative to these disproportionate outcomes? And because I guess for me, when I see this list, it looks like the same old MMSD list that we would put in probably any plan. Probably go on the early literacy plan and the this and the that, and I'm saying that with love. Like we reference the same list of things because this is how school systems are built, right? So I just am not convinced that we would get any different outcome based on what's listed. And so if there is something in here that is uniquely like positions us well and positions our staff well. I guess I would love to see those like either highlighted or that we're like really banking on a set of a certain set of these strategies, because I just don't know how we'll get a different outcome.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your question. So, and I think about this a lot. So I think first of all, having a goal number one
Yeah,
that says as a school district, we recognize that we have disproportionality in special education and it's a problem. And really acknowledging that, I think is a first step. And I would also say that your point is a very good one, and simultaneously that all of these have to come together with constant conversations as a school district and staff and leadership about why disproportionality is a problem and what it actually means, what it actually represents when we have disproportionality in special education. I would say that increasing the number of classrooms for early childhood students. So the fact that this year it was very impactful for our families and students in our community to have additional 4K classrooms. And Becky talked about touring schools. I was called on at the beginning of this year to tour a lot of 4K classrooms where principals and staff were like, oh, we have students who need an evaluation. And we had to say, nope, slow down the train. This may be the first time in school for many of these students. And after a couple of months,
okay,
they're
that's not
steadily
even listed.
doing better.
That's not even listed. I feel like something like that
Mhm.
would be like, want a strategy that could be listed, right? As like pausing identification.
Yep.
And a set at 4K. Not, if a family feels like
Right.
they need that, but it's just more. Do you understand my point? Like,
Yeah.
right now, I just don't know how
Sure.
letters training for teachers is the thing that's gonna change disproportionality, and if it is. Because you're like, well, if teachers are actually understanding the
Yep.
science of reading,
Yep.
it then leads to this, and then it leads to that. But I can't tell from the list. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, so I would hope there could be something different.
Well, and sometimes it's
Okay.
a combination of factors.
Right, which I hear
There's
you.
not
It's not
one
gonna-
particular thing, but it could be a combination of factors. And as, I can remember working on these plans in the past too. It was, it's also about, having a strong core instruction first is critical, so kids have access to that strong core instruction. Because I remember saying to families when I was a principal, I take very seriously any recommendation for referral to special education. Like, I take that very seriously as a school building leader and as a parent. Here's why we should all take that seriously for your little one. So I do wonder about if there isn't a place where we can elevate these kinds of conversations and the ways that we're engaging with families about what might work and why, and how we're talking with families about, I'm thinking about what all of you have said about lifting the gifts the children have, with more of an asset-based approach to it. What are some of the qualitative things that people have been saying, and what are some of the combinations of ways we interact with families to reduce the disproportionality that we exist?
And I would say, in addition, the question that you just posed, the anti-racist evaluation criteria, really, and it's not linked yet because we just have gotten it to a place where we're about to start piloting it, really speaks to what have we tried to support this child prior to, and you're absolutely right. If we get a written request for a referral, we have to move forward with an evaluation. But we want teams to stop and think about what experiences has this child had, what strategies, what multi-level systems of support have been provided to them in general education prior to moving into a special education evaluation. And even as we do that, what are the exclusionary factors that may be at play that we have to consider? But I hear you that, I mean, this list is, I do think the combination can help us reduce disproportionality. But how do we describe it so that it's more clear? I think is.
Yeah, I mean, cause there's, yeah,
Mm.
you get my point. But like I looked at RJ modeling and professional learning, and I was like, really? Like, how well are we doing that? And that's actually gonna be like one of the most effective strategies. It could be,
Mhm.
but I guess based on what I've come to know about where we are with RJ, it just doesn't seem it doesn't seem like one of the most promising strategies.
It's not targeted.
Yeah, so you get my point. I don't need to belabor. Okay, great. That was goal one. All right, I do have a couple more questions. Okay. The other question that I have is related to goal two, which is to increase inclusion as measured by the IEP, with students being in general ed 80% or more of the time. And you also say in the plan, not you, Nancy, the plan's references that the IEP team determines the types, amounts, frequencies, and setting for each service, special ed or general ed. And then I'm looking at this data. And this data tells me that as students go from elementary, where they're like at 90% inclusion in general ed, to middle school, it drops down to about 84%, and then to high school at 63. And now I'm looking for these strategies. What are the strategies that are gonna actually help our middle and our high school students meet this goal? Particularly at the high school level. And again, I don't wanna sound snarky, but I probably will. I just don't see the strategies here that are gonna tell me that we're gonna change an outcome or a trajectory for a young person. Like scholars with an IEP not being singled out. Okay, consistent effort to engage on the core. Yes, I agree with you. The core is critical. And we also know our young people, by the time they get to high school, as adolescents, and you know what I mean? Like, there's just so many other things. And I think I had brought this up before, like, I just don't see what the differentiated and targeted supports are for our students as they move into the secondary grades. And that seems critical, like as a focus area for us to change the outcomes and to meet this goal. If we could even get the high school students, and if staff are the ones that are determining the types, amounts, and frequencies of the setting and the service, I guess I don't see a strategy on here that even talks about the staff. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I don't know, is like, that's supposed to also be part of the anti-racist IEP or not? And I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm super passionate, but I had students that were identified.
Yeah.
And so like, I read this and I'm trying to read it through the lens of young men in our district that, you know, could have gotten more.
Right, yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that this is like, it's another section of the plan where what you're asking about, the questions you're asking are really good ones, and it lives in our professional learning plan for our special education staff. To, as IEP teams have conversations that we want services to be in general education as much as possible. And that we want to be stressed, co-teaching as a strategy,
Okay.
particularly at the high school level. So I think that you're asking excellent questions, because all the details definitely don't live here at this moment in terms of the strategies that we utilize. This is kind of an overview, and then the details live more in other places, like a professional learning plan for our special education staff. So
Okay,
really good questions. Yes.
okay. And then the last thing I will say is, I have so you can tell my theme is around strategies.
Yep. Yeah.
I also had made a note to myself that for goal 3, which is really around, reading and math proficiency, I had a similar question around and what exactly are the strategies that would help our middle and high school students actually achieve proficiency. But you have the theme already, right? I think for me, I know that you know this, you understand a level that I can't see. And so what I'm trying to see is like, what in this plan gives kind of more alignment between the goal and the strategies. And then what needs to sit in the companion resource guide. So I think that's what I'm looking for. But I do want to just ask a data related question.
Sure.
Okay. So in 2019 and 2020, okay, and this is data that I noticed like in the opening part of the plan, page 5 and 6. Around, so if we go back to 2019, 2020, we know that that was the school year that schools shut down in March of 2020. And then 2020 and 21, we were slowly phasing students back in. So basically those were the pandemic years, right? And what I noticed is during those pandemic years, the percent of Black students with an IEP went up slightly. And then we come back fully, kind of back into full day in-person school, 21, 22, and 22, 23, and those numbers have increased. And so I'm curious about that data because I'm wondering in your own analysis, do you know if that's happening more at the elementary level, at the middle, or the high? Is it being initiated more by family request or staff observation? And you don't have to know the answer to that tonight, but for me, I feel like when we're talking about things like wanting to decrease disproportionality and we see numbers going in the opposite direction, it's important to try to understand like what could be driving that. Why would more Black students with an IEP be increasing after we've returned from the pandemic? And it could be family initiated for all I know. I don't know. It could be staff initiated. It could be all at the elementary level. I don't know. But I think wherever you all are doing your analysis and your thinking through of the strategies, it feels important to me that like there's some deep understanding of like what the data is hopefully telling us. And then to Vice President Pearson's point earlier about qualitative data, like who might we need to talk to and ask some questions of and really get a better understanding if we're serious about doing something with these goals. And that would be true for any of the data points that were included, which I'm sure you have done, but it caught my eye because then on the next page, when we talked about percent of Black students with an IEP in general ed, 80% or more of the time, in those same 2 pandemic years, like their numbers were really low. So I was like, how is it that more students could be identified, but then they were less in general ed and we were in a pandemic? But that's still looking in the rearview mirror and we're looking forward. But anyway, I appreciate the data.
Board Member Simkin?
Okay, it's kind of hard to go after that.
Sorry.
Going to. Okay, so I'm also really thinking about what's gonna start moving in the direction that we want to go. And so I have questions for 2 different categories. The first is when I'm thinking about goal 2, increasing the number of students that are spending at least 80% of their time in general ed classrooms. I'm wondering about any data that exists that would show how that might move the needle for goal number 3 in increasing proficiency in math and English. You have a reference to that, but it doesn't give any numbers. And so I'm wondering, what is the expected impact of increasing the number of students that are in general ed environments, more time in increasing those proficiency numbers?
Yeah, I don't, I would have to look at the research, to see what that tells us about, some like potential level of increase that we could expect to see, but there's definitely a large body of research that indicates that the more time students spend in general education classes, the better their academic and social and emotional outcomes are. And so you're absolutely right that that's one of, a clear rationale for us stressing increasing inclusion for our students with an IEP is that then their outcomes will be better. But I couldn't tell you what the research tells us, and I'm sure that it's different at each level. I think, the research talks about how when kids start out included to a high degree, like we do in Madison, which is wonderful, that then there's an expectation for them and their families and their educators that they will continue to be included. So we do need to dig more deeply and figure out what's happening. Our trends are not terribly dissimilar to national trends in terms of our high school students, but it doesn't mean this is what we want them to be, right? So we want to make sure that we're figuring out the strategies to keep students included all the way through high school so that they can have those opportunities. One of the things we talk about, like one of our strategies there, is doing a double scoop of content areas so that students can be in English 1 and have a reading intervention if they're identified as having that need versus having to choose between them. So, but there's other strategies as well. But you're right, there's a strong connection between the two.
So thinking about what Board President Nichols was asking, would it be accurate to define goal 2 as a strategy towards meeting goal 3?
Yes, I would say that it is one of our strategies, but also important to have a goal to track our data.
So my other question again is about how we're getting towards the strategies towards meeting this goal. And I'm really wondering about the PINE program. So the district has, we've done a pilot, we've now expanded it. And so first I'm wondering how many students or what percentage of students with IEPs in the district are currently participating in the PINE program?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a professional learning platform for staff.
Okay.
So it's really about helping staff understand how to include students meaningfully and help them be engaged in school alongside their peers without an IEP. So right now, PINE is offered at all of our elementary schools. So just starting this year and really just starting in the last couple of months. So we expanded from small pilot to all elementary schools. But we have still maintained just 2 middle schools and 1 high school thus far. Our thinking is that the PINE program, we intend for that to follow students. So as our elementary students and families and staff become sort of fully embracing the PINE program and the connection to our special education plan, that we would then expand the offering of PINE as a professional learning platform for staff at additional levels.
Okay, thank you for that. Can you talk a little bit about how that professional learning then may intersect with goals 1 and 2?
Sure, absolutely. So I think the intersection with goal number 1 is that PINE stresses high expectations. PINE does not specifically address the issue of disproportionality in special education. So it intersects in stressing that there's a wide range of learners in every single classroom and a wide range of ways to help students engage and measure progress, and a range of, behaviors, both academic behaviors and social and emotional behaviors. So I think that's the connection there. It's squarely connected to our goal number 2 and listed as one of the strategies. And so it clearly Pine talks about the fact that students will do better, students with and without disabilities will do better and learn from each other in inclusive settings, classrooms as well as extracurricular activities and communities. And then the piece that you just named, with goal 3 and the connection of Pine stressing inclusion and then knowing that inclusion leads to better outcomes for students. So increasing those proficiency rates, you have to be in a classroom and be exposed to content and instruction in order to learn from it.
Is there gonna be any effort to explicitly connect that learning, that professional development of staff with these goals?
Yes.
Can you describe that a little bit?
Sure. So our special education staff enroll like professional learning that they have once a month. We always bring the learning back to one or more of the goals in the special education plan draft. So again, these goals that, we were asked to set SMART goals as departments last year, and these were essentially the 3 goal areas that we chose. And so we've been putting those in front of special education staff and connecting those with learning since the beginning of last school year. And we'll continue to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Castro?
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a 2 comments about what I'd like to see further in the plan. The first is I do think that we can still eliminate some of the deficit-based language. I think it could be more cross-functional in how we assess a student's strengths that can be leveraged as well. I'll say it seems like there needs to be some consolidation within the documents so that we get the goals and the how in the same document, so we don't have to reference all these different documents. And then with goal number 2, I just wanted, I realized how contextually and historically, and even today, how important it is. But still would like to see like a professional being and a family being able to make a choice that's what's best for their kid at that moment in time. With respect to, sometimes a kid might need time out the classroom for a day or so.
Thank you.
Board Vice President Pearson?
So my quick question is just, how are we kind of linking the special ed plan and the advanced learning opportunities as well? I'm coming from a kid who had IEP, but also was identified in areas, advanced areas in like math and literacy, but didn't happen. So how are we looking to kind of put those pieces together? Because we do have a lot of students who may need an IEP, maybe because of behavioral issues or whatever, but cognitively they are at a level where they can be advanced learning areas. So are we connecting to?
Yeah, absolutely. So a student with an IEP who is also an advanced learner, that should be pretty clearly described in both the IEP as well as the advanced learning plan that student has. And in addition, the advanced learning specialist from the school should be invited to IEP meetings to speak to those strengths and that progress. And then conversely, special education staff should be invited to the any advanced learning meetings or discussions, so that they aren't being seen, it's one child, right? It's a whole child. And so that child has many strengths that we need to make sure that we're celebrating and identifying in documentation. So I think I wouldn't say that we're perfect by any means, but I think that advanced learning staff and special education staff are talking much more and inviting each other into the spaces to make sure that we're recognizing support needs that a student has, as well as the strengths that they have, emphasizing the celebration of those strengths that the student has.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think the conversations around Twice Exceptional have come up more, and as our team is also working on revising the advanced learning plan, that's been an area of focus that we've been trying to address, both in terms of what the current data says, as well as areas of improvement. I think that what Nancy said is true, and I think sometimes we have to remind staff that it's important that a student is not a singular thing, like students have assets across the board and how they're ensuring that we're uplifting that. So it is definitely something that I think is also an area of improvement that we're addressing through our advanced learning plan. I think the only other thing I would say with that as well, as in all forms of advanced learning, right? Leadership, creativity, for as well. So I think that's something that while we're talking about it, there's an area of improvement that we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think, going to Savian's point, I think everyone has kind of pointed this out of just like how we are looking at the strengths of our students and wanting our students to participate in class more. And then like, what does that look like, especially when they have opportunities or they have been identified in both realms. And, you know, we generally as society see advanced learning and as a strength all the time. And we put a lot of emphasis on, you know, groups of kids who have been identified, but how are we linking those? And I don't ever see it. I've never experienced it personally of being, I mean, I've experienced it of identification, but not further than from that, outside of that. So, I think just changing the narrative that, you know, our kids who have IEPs and disabilities have the opportunities to be able to be in that, in advanced learning and whether it's in arts or leadership as well. So I think those are areas that we also don't focus a lot on, that we have students identified in both realms. And so I would like to see more of how we can integrate those plans together, and mentions of each other. One, not just for us as a board, but then also as a district, but also for families to know that those are also options there and ready to go if that is part of the plan that the families move forward with. So that's it.
I'm just sitting here listening, and appreciating, the comments and the reflections, and I just wanted to offer, just sort of from my perspective and my history, around, right, the purpose of the major plans, that are written, right? What it serves for all of us is it gives us a set of common language around beliefs and vision for our students in this case in special education who are receiving special education services. I heard some key things here that I really think the team can integrate and can take back and make some, I think, really visible changes in the plan. I think the piece around strength-based language and where that shows up is essential. I think our team needs to take a pass at that in the plan and make sure that we are representing the skills and assets that our students bring and their experiences and make sure that's showing up. I think actually that this connection between the WestEd report and the new plan, I think we can articulate that in a little bit clearer way. So I want to value that and say that I think we have a responsibility to bring that together. I think this tightening of strategies, like what are we going to stop doing and what are we going to do, I think is important to tighten that up a little bit so it doesn't feel as, I'm not saying this is, but so it doesn't feel sort of like checklisty. I also think this piece, I've heard it more than once about this twice exceptionality. How does that show up? But there is just another, if I may, caution around this. This can't house everything. And I'm gonna tell you what my behavior was tonight while I was listening to this. Link PD plan. Link the resources for parents. Like I started I started writing this on my notepad here and I thought, okay, Lisa, stop. Like, those are working documents we have as a district. That's implementation.
Mhm.
We don't want all of that linked in this plan. That's the real work, right? At some point, our team's got to do the real work. And we'll come back and give updates to the board around that real work. But I think what we're doing is we're talking about day-to-day implementation. And we're also talking about sort of what are our beliefs and what do we believe this should represent about the board's feelings about services that children receive if they receive special education services. So I think our team has some work to do to figure out that balance in this. So it doesn't just become a series of links and documents in here, but does represent some of these big things that we talked about. And doesn't get into the finite kinds of things that sometimes happen on a day-to-day basis. Each student that has a special ed need, as we know, needs something a little bit different. So I'm just trying to figure out how we balance that in the plan, so it doesn't become, Lee, you and I have talked about this before, so it doesn't feel stale, right? And that it actually represents the spirit and beliefs we have about children. And then what kind of individualized plans do we put together with all of these resources? Like, I started looking at our webpage in special ed, and I was writing link this link, and I thought, okay, Lisa, I'm falling into it here. So I think we can better find that balance when we go back and think this through, so that there is something that represents what all of you, I believe, brought to the table in your suggestions and thinking. I can tell that you all, have looked at this, and I mean, this is the work that we do for our babies, and some of us our own babies. So we want to, like, what's that sweet spot, I think, in the document that it's something that we can be proud of, but that we also look forward to then on a yearly basis and update around to then really talk about some of those implementation pieces and the real work, like what's actually happening. How are we talking to folks about it? So I hope that makes sense. I just wanted to offer some of my own, how I was participating in this conversation as well.
I greatly appreciate that. And I do want to say my plan is to vote in favor of this plan while maintaining, I think, due diligence as a board member and being critical of our approach. That being said, I think the points that were made by our president this evening are some of the most potent points I think could be made in a conversation like this. What we gain from our data over and over again is that we treat Black students differently. And so when you say we treat this population differently, but the solution is the same thing we do for everybody else, there's something wrong. And there's kind of a surface level approach, in my opinion, to how we're actually going to ensure these outcomes. And so I can't say it better than our board president said it, but I think that those remarks should stay with all of us for a very long time, and should push us to a space of action. One of the things I think I've struggled to bring up in board meetings before, and I think about in this conversation specifically, and in all conversations, is who are the kiddos that get left out in the way we're having this conversation. And both I and my partner have worked in education for the majority of our adult careers, and we both worked with kids who are terminally ill. And when you think about a plan like this and what it means to families who have a student who has a degenerative disability, meaning things are not going to get better or easier for that kiddo, then what is the point of school? And my partner went with a student in high school last year who lost tremendous skills as the year went on because she had a brain tumor. And she still wanted to come to school every single day. That was her life. That was her community. And so our schools are not just getting our kids ready for the community. Our schools are the community. And when we think about what our students need from their community, no matter what their learning looks like or what their behavior looks like, I hope we're making sure that we're seeing our students in their humanity. We're seeing our students as people who need to be cared about and seen for who they are. And I greatly appreciate the thoughtfulness with which my fellow board members approached this dialogue this evening, and all the work you all have done to get this plan in front of us. Board members, is there anything more you need before we bring this to a vote at the end of the month? And I know we're getting late and folks gotta get ready for the snowstorm. But I do think it's important that if there are things that are really gonna impact your ability to vote on this, the team hears from you all.
Whenever an update, if there are any updates to be made, when you all think you'll be able to get it to us before the vote.
I
know. Sorry, I won't.
That
I always have the time frame, right?
My calendar.
And you don't have to answer that now, but
Too many meetings.
my question is also
Well-
like, if it does not pass, then what are the implications, and then what, when will it come back if it does not pass? And I'm not saying that it won't, or we're not gonna vote for it, but just always as a contingency.
Well, and I guess I would, I don't even know if it's my role to do this, but since I'll probably be a key person working on it. When do you need it? I guess. Tomorrow could be tricky, but.
I mean, the board.
What
meeting
would work for you all as a
Thursday before, right? At the very latest,
Yeah.
the Thursday before the board meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, the 20th.
in the update?
I think the other question though, inherent to that question is, when do we need to have a plan? And I do think it's
Right.
relevant to acknowledge that we had a plan from 2016 to 2019 and we have not had plans since. So for me, I'm really uncomfortable.
Yep.
Continuing to kick the can down the road with this specific plan. I think we owe it to our community to be accountable to what we're doing. That's my personal.
Well, that's why I asked about, like, what are the
Weekly update.
implications of not, if it does not pass? Cause we've seen
Yeah.
significant plans. before.
And I.
Right.
Sorry.
I'm just saying.
Do a red line in it and send it on the
What would be
25th.
update?
Yeah, so we'll do a red line version on the 25th, so you can see where the team has taken feedback and adjusted.
And I just wanna remind.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I felt like a lot of the feedback that I heard tonight, whether it came in a question format or more of a declarative statement, I think you have most of it. It's, you know what I mean? Like, you were able to speak to a lot of things tonight. It's just, for whatever reason, in that balance between us understanding the implementation well enough to lift up to the balcony and say like, okay, I understand how we're gonna make some traction on these goals. I think that's what I'm hearing as well, is like, what's enough detail of the implementation without being in the weeds? Because yes, you have to have like day-to-day work plans and actions, but just enough that I think we and others who might access it could better understand like how we're moving in that direction. But it seemed like you have it, it's just maybe needs to be compiled a little differently. So hope, maybe.
Yeah, no, I think it's just what you said, right? The balance of details, like how much detail
Yeah,
should live
in this.
in here versus in the other, like, professional learning that we provide
And stuff we're changing and revising and reflecting on a regular basis, 'cause that's just,
Right.
yeah. Right, cause
Board Member Mosmer Feltman, we haven't heard from you in this conversation. Is there anything you need in order to vote at the end of the month, or any questions you have regarding the plan?
Thanks for asking. Mostly what is on my mind is the use of an MTSS system. That's my work in my day job. And especially at high schools, like the prevailing wisdom and all the research over the past 10 years says it's like nobody really knows how to do it well at high schools. And so that's that's the thing that's sort of in my head, is like the thing I want to be thinking about in preparation for our vote at the end of the month.
Claire, do you want somebody to speak to that before I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Sure. I feel like I have like a more thinking to do, but
Okay.
if someone has like a really good ready answer to solving that problem, I would hear it both for this part of my life and also for the other parts of my life, because it's not something that is clear about how to do that well at the high school level.
Yeah, oh.
Okay.
Sure, well, I'll share that, that's been my experience as an educator as well, is that it's easy to talk about on paper and verbally, and harder in implementation to have a really robust, good tracking, like set of multi-tiered systems of support in different areas and then track progress for individual students. We do have student services intervention teams at each school. And so that group comes together weekly and talks about individual students, whether they're having academic struggles or other kinds of struggles in the school, or not coming to school, or not engaging in all of their classes. But when we sit down to talk about, and at the high school level in particular, when we sit down to talk about, okay, so then what do we know is working for some of those students, then it's like the answers aren't as clear. So I think we still have work to do there. So I think we have the same experience that you're describing. But however, we have systems in place. We just need to continue to tackle it. I think. Yeah, but I did write that down as a note to kind of at least describe in more detail what we currently do at each level.
All right, and with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second, Maya, second.
So moved by board president, second. All those in favor, aye. Motion's adjourned, y'all.